Well, the correlation between a lot of skiing that most people like to do in prime avalanche terrain is that they're the same areas.
Good ski terrain is good avalanche terrain.
I think that understanding avalanche terrain and choosing your line while you move through the mountains is about the most important thing you can understand well if you're going to travel in the backcountry. Avalanche hazard is something that we can't control. It's just out there. But what we can control is risk. Because risk is about us and it's about where we're standing in relation to that hazard.
What's a reasonable risk? If you make the right choices by choosing the right terrain, given the conditions, you can reduce those to a completely reasonable margin. It is possible to ski powder every day. No matter how bad the avalanche conditions, we can ski it safely just by choosing the right terrain.
I'm Scott Flavelle, freelance avalanche consultant.
I'm Grant Statham. I'm the Mountain Risk Specialist for Parks Canada.
Your position in the terrain in relation to that avalanche hazard is the single most important thing you need to know out there. Where you're actually standing and how you're exposed to the avalanche hazard. Everything depends on where you're standing and when you're standing there. So we're going to discuss 5 main areas of learning that will help you move through the mountains safely. Recognizing avalanche terrain, common trigger areas, aspect in relation to sun and wind, elevation, and safe travel practices. The thing about avalanche terrain is you can see it. And the mountains are giving you visible clues of where the avalanche terrain is and where avalanches are likely to run. So it's your job to be able to look up and see those clues.
One of the most important things to do in the backcountry is to keep your eyes open and be perceptive and observe, but not to just go blindly out into the mountains thinking you're all just these big sheets of white.
The very first thing you need to know about is the classic avalanche path. You see them everywhere. There's thousands of them in the mountains. It's those big strips where there's no trees down the mountainside. Avalanche paths have 3 main parts to them. The start zone, where the snow accumulates and the avalanche initiates. The track, where the avalanche gains speed and momentum and really gets cooking. And the run-out zone, and that's where the angle decreases and the snow begins to decelerate and kind of spread out and slow down.
We've just come into a great big open area here. You can see it's obviously an avalanche run-out zone, and there's a big path that goes way up there. What we have to worry about is large avalanches hitting us down here.
Destination with a nation, living life in overdrive. Liberation, proclamation, do you manage one to ride them?
When you're in the forest, another really obvious clue for avalanche terrain is damaged trees.
So over there you can see that a number of those trees are missing branches on the uphill side. They're bent over, and there's one right there that's snapped in half. So that's very clear evidence that large avalanches have run through here in the past.
Slope angle and shape together are the 2 most important pieces to use when choosing your route through avalanche terrain. Generally, terrain steeper than 45 degrees is self-regulating, so that means constant sloughing. With that happening, big slabs don't really get a chance to build up. Now, it's not to say they don't happen, because they do on occasion, but the most important measure is between 25 and 45 degrees, which is about the same as a black diamond ski run at the hill. Once you're under 25 degrees, gravity's hard at work there, and generally that's not steep enough to see large slabs happening. It's not only important to know where an avalanche could occur, but what's going to happen if it does. You should always be looking down and asking yourself, what if? Areas you have to be particularly careful about, we call those terrain traps.
In essence, what a terrain trap is a spot where a small amount of snow from an avalanche can create quite a deep burial.
Some examples of terrain traps include gullies, creeks, depressions, or places you can get funneled into and buried deeply, or roads, lakes, flat areas where snow will pile up, alpine features like crevasses, bergschrunds, seracs, moraines, or cliffs. An important terrain trap that people often don't consider is trees.
We've got a stand of very thick, tight little balsam trees, okay, and they basically create a wall that the snow can pile up quite deeply against.
You know, a big part of the risk of getting caught in an avalanche isn't just getting buried, but also getting hurt. A lot of people get caught in avalanches and get hurt or killed and don't get buried. It's because they smash into stuff. Now we've talked about recognizing avalanche terrain. But if you want to move in a little bit closer and talk about your position in that terrain, you need to be able to pick out the common trigger points in the starting zones.
A convex roll is a shape that is like the outside of a beach ball. So the snowpack is actually under tension right on the convex roll. So it's stretching itself over the convexity, and if you just nick the convexity sometimes, that's all it takes to crack an avalanche.
When I come across a big convexity in the middle of a ski run that either I expected or I didn't, the first thing I do is stop on top of it, give myself back enough room that I can actually see how I'm going to deal with it, and then I'll either choose to go through it, and that's a pretty common place to go one at a time, or else I might choose to go around it.
You can see if you drew a line sort of down and right from where they are, it's convex, but then it becomes concave down to that long traversing track. Generally, a concave slope is somewhat self-supported from the bottom up.
In a lot of cases, shallow rocky areas with variable snow depth, well, those are the kind of places where common trigger points exist and you can trigger avalanches.
Why are rocks generally weak spots in the snowpack? Well, not only are they just simply holes in the snowpack, but generally the ground is warmer than the air in the winter. So right around that rock, the snow crystals change and usually become quite sugary, and so they're weak. This is a classic slope with rocks sticking out through the start zone. So if you were to actually ski from rock to rock to rock, that would probably be the easiest way to trigger that particular slope.
So a place like that, I would personally stay clear of that terrain always. You'd never find me skiing in there. And the reason is that, first of all, it faces south, so it takes tons of sun. That means it's also windward, because prevailing wind comes from the south. And that makes for a shallow and variable snowpack.
Rocks are useful sometimes to show you where safe areas are. Like generally ridges are safe and they're usually rockier. So you can't just say rocks are dangerous. It's just when they're in a start zone like that that they're actually weaknesses.
Cornices are, I think, one of the bigger hazards in the alpine environment. Lots of people are killed by cornices. And one of the reasons is you can't see them when you're above them. And when they fail, they're big and they're stiff, and so the fracture line spreads way back. It's not uncommon to be sucked off a 5-degree slope if you're near a cornice.
When you're approaching a cornice, you got to be really sure it's not going to break underfoot. You want to find a vantage point or a vertical wall that you've seen from somewhere else to make sure it's not overhanging. And if there's any doubt in your mind, you should be well back from the edge.
Cornices are a really good indicator of the direction of the wind and the snow transport.
In this case, if the wind came from the backside and most of the snow decelerated the lip, formed a cornice, and the rest of the snow fell down lower onto the slope. So you'd expect both a fragile cornice and a wind slab. The whole ridge is very skiable, modern, steep terrain. And there's some slopes that are much safer than others. Take, for example, the ones underneath the overhanging cornice noses. Those cornices fall off when you're not expecting you might be in the path. So your best lines for skiing this steep terrain is simply those chutes that don't have cornices above.
Leeward areas are generally on the back side of a ridge behind where the wind is coming from. So those are the kind of places where the wind deposits the snow it's been carrying. That's wind loading, and that's a common trigger area. So watch out on the back side of ridges. The next major point is aspect. Two major contributors to the avalanche hazard are the sun and the wind, and that's why we pay attention to the aspect. The aspect is the direction that the slope is facing. As the sun moves across the sky through the day, there's predictable patterns in which the sun is going to affect the snow.
These are all due south facing. They've been getting sun since the sun came up in the morning till it sets in the evening. So those get radically altered by the sun. The east slopes are affected in the morning and the west slopes in the afternoon, and the south slopes are generally affected all day long. But as you look out around at the glaciers, the Spearhead Range, Everywhere that's in the shadow right now in the middle of the day is northerly facing, so northeast, north, or northwest. And some of those slopes won't see a lick of sun all day. When the sun hits the snowpack, the snow starts to warm up. It's becoming more viscous, like a piece of toffee stretching down the slope. And if it gets really sunny and warm, then the snow grains actually start melting and becoming water-like, and then they have no strength at all, like a big pile of loose peas that want to slide down the mountainside. Typically, shaded snowpacks are often stronger than solar aspects.
North-facing terrain we like in some way because it's shaded. It doesn't get any sun on it, so we don't have sun crust problems, and generally it doesn't heat up. What it does do is that shade will make instabilities persist on those aspects, things that are buried in the snow that don't disappear when the snow settles because it's so cold in there. So the steeper the slope, the more it takes the sun. The bottom part of the bowl is not very steep. That's probably 15 degrees down there, so that's not going to have a lot of sun effect on it, and it probably doesn't have much sun crust on it. But if you tilt up onto the side where those point releases are, that's probably 35 to 40 plus degrees up there. That's going to probably have sun crust on it today, and that snow is going to be getting moist and taking real sun effect because it's steeper.
There's patterns with how the wind affects the snow as well. So try to get a handle on where the wind is coming from and how it's deposited on the terrain you're traveling through.
Something to keep in mind about wind, lots of times if you read the bulletin it talks about certain aspects to be careful of, which is really important. That's key information. Prevailing wind is a funny thing though, because southwest wind prevails up high, but there's always what we call local wind effect down here. So when you get down to this level and the wind comes ripping through here, what it's doing is funneling its way around all these terrain features. So you can't necessarily use just a general wind direction as a measure. You got to feel each one and figure out the wind patterns of the local terrain that you're working through.
Indicators and clues on the snow surface can tell you which direction local winds are blowing, and that can tell you which way the snow is being transported. Just take a look at the drifts. You can see which way the snow has been drifting overnight. You can get a look at which way the fresh recent cornices have been built. You can feel it under your feet while you're walking up and changing different aspects and get a feel for how the snow is loading on this terrain.
Windward terrain is a slope that faces directly into the wind, so the wind presses right into it and oftentimes strips the snow from it. Leeward terrain is terrain that's on the other side of the wind, so the wind often slows down and deposits snow on top of it. So it's on the back side of the wind.
Fetch areas where the snow is collected, moved by the wind, and put into the lee area. The fetch area just on the other side of that corner, just over my shoulder, is stripped of snow. And not 3 meters further into the lee, the snowpack can be up to 3 meters deep.
The classic version of wind loading is the wind comes over the ridge and deposits it on the other side, but what's most common is cross loading, and that's when the wind blows across a slope and loads it at a variable depth across the slope. So that's a really easy place to trigger an avalanche because there's a wind load and there's variable depth on the slab, so you really got to watch out for cross-loaded terrain. Now let's take a look at elevation and how the changing elevations affect the avalanche hazard.
Today we're here at Rogers Pass on this beautiful day, and our goal today is to do a ski tour up into the Alpine. We've checked the public avalanche bulletin, we've done our pre-trip planning, and now we're ready to go. You're beeping, and you're beeping too. First place we're going to find ourselves is below tree line. And here we are. So far, no problems from avalanches. There's no avalanche terrain above us. It's common that hazard is less below tree line, and generally that's because there's less snow down here, and the wind doesn't affect the snow as much. The tree's protected. Thick forest cover will prevent avalanches, but as soon as you start to get glades that are generally opening up for quite good skiing and you got lots of spacing in the trees, that's when you can start to think about avalanches happening. Think about the consequences of being caught in an avalanche. What's below you if you're going to trigger one? Is it a smooth run out, or are you going to get smashed into a big pile of trees? So you do have to be quite careful below tree line still. So right now, we're below tree line with no avalanche terrain. Our risk is low. The minute we step into an avalanche path or we change locations at all, our risk is going to change. And that's why we're continually evaluating. And we're going to have another look up here just around the corner. We're in the transition zone between the big forest down low and the alpine conditions that we see up high. Tree line is more of a concept than a place. It occurs at different elevations, but really we have to be careful there because that's where the snowpack makes significant changes. Avalanche hazard is generally higher at tree line and in the alpine, and the reason for that is there's more snow up here and there's a lot more wind. And those are two of the big three contributors to avalanche hazard. So we see larger avalanches and it's easier to trigger them in areas of tree line and above. As we start moving from here up, we're going to be thinking about different things and looking at how the snow works with the terrain. You guys ready to go poke up in the alpine?
I'll poke you in the alpine.
The alpine is a really complex place. There's lots of stuff up here, ranging from big open bowls to glaciated terrain, cliffs, cornices, you know, all that kind of stuff lives up here. For me, being in the alpine is all about seeing where I'm going. Some of the things we think about up here are how we expose ourselves to this terrain. Alpine terrain is often roly-poly with lots of convex rolls and convoluted places. And I kind of look at it as an opportunity. When I see, you know, a big open snowfield, I think, wow, there's this blank canvas. I got to put a good line through there. That's on the way up and down. Well, the alpine is, of course, way more exposed to the elements. So there's more snow with elevation, there's more wind, and generally it's colder up here. So we see way more wind loading, and we see a ton of variation in the snow cover. And that's possibly the most important thing from an avalanche perspective, because right over there might be 1 meter of snow, and just over that roll there could be 4 meters of snow. And it's the difference in snow depth that creates this dramatic variation, and is what causes us big troubles when trying to predict avalanches up here.
So now we got a sense of how to evaluate our position in the terrain and how we might want to move from point A to point B. So let's take a look at safe travel practices so we can make that happen.
There's some safe practices for traveling in the backcountry that are really going to reduce your risk and increase your longevity. The rule of thumb is not to be on the same avalanche slope as somebody else. And you can minimize that by spreading out, skiing one at a time, waiting in safe spots. Look at that spot where they stopped. It's a high point of land. It's well away from the slope. If that slope were to avalanche, it would not reach them.
When you're skiing a big line, there's things to think about. You need to know where your safe points are on the face. If anything happened, island of safety is, you know, it's something that's a little bit higher up, so if something goes, it's going to go around it. You need to have all those things in your head and know where they are before you drop.
Anytime I deal with avalanche terrain, if at all possible, I want to be on top of it. So right now we're on a ridge crest, and that's the best place we could possibly be because it's high ground, so all the avalanche terrain falls underneath us. And that's the key. Anytime you can take the high ground, make sure you find your way there.
A ski cut can help you in your control program where it can get you into a lot of trouble. Ski cutting, you're going across the top of the start zone and you're aiming for a safe spot. If you're doing it at the right time and place, will release at your ski. It'll break below you and you'll traverse out to the side, whereas if you're skiing downslope, you continue down a turn or two and it all breaks above you, and then you're caught in the avalanche.
And I'm going to be pushing downhill with my left foot. There we go. Keeping my right foot up on safe ground where it's not going to slide.
So, safe travel practices. Ski one at a time, stop in safe spots, travel on high ground, put a ski cut into a slope before you drop into it. So now we're going to move into learning a bit more about the snowpack, and that's going to help us predict avalanches.